9 campers disappeared without a trace in the summer of 1981, their fate remaining one of the wilderness's most chilling mysteries for over 4 decades. Their discovery, tents perfectly preserved and sealed underground, has shocked even the most seasoned park rangers who thought they'd seen everything these forests could hide. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Emily Carter wiped sweat from her brow as she trudged through the dense undergrowth of Pisgah National Forest. The spring storm had passed, leaving behind a mosaic of fallen branches and exposed soil across her patrol route. As a park ranger, she'd seen the forest in all its moods. But something about today felt different, the air heavier, the silence more pronounced. Her boots sank into a patch of earth that didn't match the surrounding terrain. Too flat, too regular. Emily knelt down, her trained eyes noticing subtle discoloration in the soil. Using her small field trowel, she began to scrape away the top layer, expecting to find perhaps an old campfire pit or forgotten trash. What she uncovered defied explanation. Fabric, synthetic material that shouldn't have survived underground. The ranger dug more frantically, her heart racing as shapes began to emerge from the earth. One tent, then another, until 9 distinct structures revealed themselves, preserved as if they'd been buried yesterday, not 4 decades ago. "This is impossible," she whispered to herself, brushing dirt from a faded blue tent flap. The material was intact, showing only minimal degradation despite being sealed beneath layers of compacted soil. Emily recognized the designs, vintage camping gear from the early 80s. A chill ran down her spine as realization dawned. These were the missing campers' tents, the 9 young people who had vanished without a trace in the summer of '81. Within hours, Emily had secured the site and contacted her superiors. By nightfall, the forest clearing buzzed with activity. Forensic teams carefully excavating, photographers documenting every inch, law enforcement establishing a perimeter. The rangers stood at the edge, watching as each tent was meticulously uncovered, tagged, and prepared for transport. News traveled fast in Asheville. By the next morning, local stations broadcast images of the discovery, and social media exploded with theories. The case that had haunted the community for generations was suddenly front-page news again. Emily found herself thrust into the spotlight, fielding questions she couldn't yet answer. How were they preserved? Were there remains? Who buried them? The phone calls began 3 days later. Families who had never received closure, who had lived for 42 years with the agony of not knowing. They were coming back to Asheville. Clara Miller clutching her brother Jonathan's journals. Thomas Hayes still carrying the weight of his daughter Rebecca's disappearance. Others whose lives had been frozen in 1981. As Emily stared at the collection of tents now arranged in the evidence warehouse, she knew this discovery wasn't just about solving a mystery. It was about confronting whatever had been deliberately hidden beneath the forest floor. A secret someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal from the world. The morning mist still clung to the mountains when Clara Miller pulled into the ranger station parking lot. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the worn cardboard box from her passenger seat. Inside lay the last tangible pieces of her brother's life, Jonathan Miller's journals, photographs, and postcards, preserved for over 4 decades in her attic. At 53, Clara's once auburn hair now carried streaks of silver, but her determination remained undiminished. "I've waited long enough," she told Emily Carter, sliding the box across the desk. "These might help you understand who they were, who Jonathan was." Emily nodded solemnly. The ranger had barely slept since the discovery, her phone ringing constantly with media inquiries. The pressure of being the lead investigator weighed heavily on her shoulders, but she knew her burden paled compared to what the families had endured. "I've memorized every word in these journals," Clara continued, her fingers tracing the leather binding. "My brother wasn't just some reckless kid. He noticed things others didn't. The station door opened, bringing with it a gust of cool air, and Thomas Hayes. The man's weathered face betrayed years of silent suffering, his posture rigid as he introduced himself. Thomas had driven 14 hours straight from Ohio after hearing the news. "My daughter Rebecca wasn't careless," he stated, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Everyone painted those kids as thrill-seekers who got lost. I'm here to set the record straight." Emily offered them coffee in the small conference room, away from the gathering press outside. The walls, covered with maps of Pisgah National Forest, seemed to close in as the three sat together, united by circumstance. "The tents were deliberately buried," Emily explained, spreading photographs across the table. "This wasn't a natural occurrence or accident." Clara pulled out a faded photograph of 9 smiling young people, posed before their hiking trip. Jonathan was only 20. He had just finished his 2nd year studying photography. Her voice cracked slightly. He was so excited about this trip. Thomas nodded, his calloused hand reaching for another picture. Rebecca had just turned 19. She wanted to prove herself. "I pushed her too hard to be independent." Emily watched as the two strangers found common ground in their grief. The ranger understood that her investigation wasn't just about solving a case. It was about healing wounds that had festered for 42 years. "I need you both to know something," Emily said, leaning forward. "This isn't just another cold case to me. Whatever happened to your loved ones, I won't stop until we have answers." Outside, camera crews had begun to gather. The story was spreading rapidly, drawing more families back to Asheville. Emily knew that 9 sets of parents, siblings, and friends would soon look to her for the truth, a responsibility that felt both overwhelming and sacred. The Asheville Gazette's front-page headline sent ripples through the community. "Missing Campers' Tents Found. 1981 Mystery Reopened." Within hours, Emily Carter's phone wouldn't stop ringing. The discovery had torn open a wound many locals had tried desperately to forget. The town hall meeting was hastily arranged in response to the growing unrest. Emily stood at the back, watching as the old municipal building filled beyond capacity. Some faces showed desperate hope, relatives clutching photographs of the missing 9, their eyes bright with possibility. Others displayed unmistakable fear. "This isn't just about finding answers," shouted Martin Keene, owner of the local hardware store. "This is about tourism, about our town's image. People need to know Asheville is safe." Clara Miller sat quietly in the 3rd row, Jonathan's journal clutched to her chest. Thomas Hayes stood near the door, arms crossed, nodding occasionally at comments supporting the investigation. Their shared pain was palpable, yet their silence spoke volumes. When Eliza Fortin, an 87-year-old Appalachian elder, took the microphone, the room fell silent. Her weathered hands trembled. As she spoke, "Some things in these mountains should remain undisturbed," she warned, her voice carrying surprising strength. "They're watchers in those woods. They've been there since before our grandfather's time. They maintain a balance. When you dig up what's been buried, you invite their attention." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. 3 other elders nodded in agreement, their faces grave. "With all due respect," Emily finally spoke up, stepping forward. "These were 9 young people with families who deserve answers, not legends." "Child," Eliza replied, fixing Emily with a penetrating stare. "Legends don't survive 5 generations without truth at their core." After the meeting, Douglas Whitman approached Emily in the parking lot. The retired ranger's face was lined with concern. "I've worked these woods for 30 years, he said quietly. "There are things I can't explain, places where compasses spin, where animals won't go." Emily shook her head. "I deal in evidence, Douglas, not ghost stories." "Just be careful," he warned. "Whatever happened to those campers, it might not be as simple as a human killer." That night, alone in her small apartment, Emily spread maps across her kitchen table, marking the discovery site with scientific precision. The rational part of her mind dismissed the superstitions, yet she couldn't shake the image of Eliza's knowing eyes or the weight of centuries of mountain folklore. Evidence, she whispered to herself, circling the burial location. I need evidence, not stories. But as rain lashed against her windows, Emily couldn't help wondering if perhaps, in these ancient mountains, the line between evidence and legend might be thinner than she wanted to believe. The afternoon light slanted through the windows of Emily Carter's office as she and Clara Miller spread the contents of a weathered cardboard box across her desk. Jonathan Miller's journals, 5 in total, lay open before them, their pages yellowed but the handwriting still crisp and clear. My brother wrote in these every night, Clara explained, her fingers tracing the neat lines of text. Even as kids, he documented everything. Emily nodded, carefully turning pages filled with detailed observations about trail conditions, wildlife sightings, and campfire conversations. Jonathan's earlier entries were enthusiastic, describing the epic adventure he and his 8 companions had embarked upon. But as the Ranger and Clara progressed through the timeline, they noticed a shift in tone. Look at this, Emily said, pointing to an entry dated 3 days before the group's disappearance. He mentions feeling watched for the first time. Clara leaned closer, her breath catching as she read her brother's words. Patrick swears someone's following us. Rebecca thinks he's paranoid, but I'm not so sure anymore. The entries grew increasingly anxious. Jonathan wrote about unexplained noises at night, equipment that moved between evening and morning, and footprints that didn't match any of the campers' boots. Wait, Emily said suddenly, noticing something odd about the journal's binding. There's a gap here. Carefully, she probed between pages and discovered a folded sheet tucked deep into the spine. It had been torn from the journal and deliberately hidden. I've never seen this, Clara whispered, her voice trembling as Emily unfolded the crinkled paper. The hidden page contained Jonathan's most disturbing entry, written in a rushed, jagged script unlike his usual neat penmanship. The Watcher was at the ridge again tonight. Not just shadows this time. I saw lights tracking our movement along the eastern trail. Rebecca's symbols might be right. Something ancient lives in these woods. We need to leave tomorrow, but Patrick wants proof first. God help us if what's watching decides we've seen too much. Emily felt a chill run through her body despite the warm office. He knew, she said quietly. They all knew something was out there. Clara's hands shook as she took the page, studying her brother's final warning. All these years, I thought it was just a hiking accident or some random attack. But this suggests premeditation, Emily finished. Someone or something was stalking them. And whatever it was, the campers were aware of it closing in. Thomas Hayes would need to see this, Emily thought. Rebecca's symbols, mentioned in Jonathan's hidden note, might be the connection they'd been missing all along. The forensic team worked methodically around the perimeter of the burial site, their blue-gloved hands sifting through decades of accumulated forest debris. Emily Carter watched intently as Dr. Ramirez, the lead soil analyst, carefully placed samples into labeled containers. This isn't a simple burial, Dr. Ramirez explained, gesturing toward the exposed edge of one faded tent. The soil stratification tells us these tents were moved at least once after their initial placement. Emily knelt beside her, examining the distinct layers of earth. You're saying someone came back? Exactly. See these synthetic fibers? The analyst pointed to tiny blue threads barely visible against the dark soil. They're from a tarp, probably used to rewrap the tents. The degradation pattern dates them to the mid-90s, at least 14 years after the campers disappeared. A chill ran down Emily's spine, despite the warm spring air. She'd been expecting to investigate a historical case, something tragic but concluded. This changed everything. Back at the ranger station, Emily spread the forensic reports across her desk as Clara Miller looked on anxiously. The sister of Jonathan hadn't left Asheville since the discovery, her determination to find answers only growing stronger with each revelation. Someone's been maintaining this site, Emily explained, pointing to the timeline the forensics team had constructed. They didn't just bury the tents and walk away. They returned years later, carefully preserving everything. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she examined the photographs. Why would anyone do that? That's what we need to find out. Emily pushed aside a stack of reports. This isn't just about what happened in '81 anymore. This is an active cover-up. Thomas Hayes arrived later that afternoon, his weathered face showing the strain of reopened wounds. Emily briefed him on the findings, watching as the stoic father processed what this meant for his daughter Rebecca's case. So whoever took them, Thomas began, is likely still out there, Emily finished, or was, at least into the 90s. Douglas Whitman, who'd been quietly listening from the corner of the room, finally spoke up. There were always rumors about someone living deep in those woods. We rangers would find strange markers, things moved around. Most of us dismissed it as hikers or wildlife. Emily turned to the retired ranger. And now? Now I wonder if we were being watched the whole time, Douglas replied, his voice heavy with regret. If we missed something right under our noses. As the others discussed possibilities, Emily stared at the map of Pisgah National Forest pinned to her wall. This wasn't just a historical mystery anymore. It was an ongoing obsession, maintained through decades of secrecy. Someone had returned to those tents, tending to them like a shrine or a secret that demanded protection. And Emily was determined to find them. Clara Miller's hands trembled as she lifted the old Kodak camera from a dusty evidence bag. The device, once belonging to Patrick Doherty, had survived 4 decades sealed beneath the earth, its film miraculously intact inside the weatherproof case he'd stored it in. I remember this, she whispered, running her fingers over the scratched plastic. Patrick never went anywhere without it. He wanted to be a photographer someday. Emily Carter watched as the technician carefully extracted the undeveloped film. Against all odds, the preservation conditions underground had kept it from complete deterioration. 3 days later, they gathered in the cramped evidence room as prints were laid out on the table. Most photos showed typical camping scenes. Jonathan Miller laughing by a campfire, Rebecca Hayes mapping their route, the group hiking along sunlit trails. But the last photograph in the sequence made Emily's blood run cold. Partially obscured by trees and motion blur, stood a figure watching the campsite from a distance. "That's a ranger uniform," Emily said, leaning closer. The distinctive olive green shirt and badge were just visible despite the poor quality. Someone in a Park Service uniform was watching them. Clara grabbed the photo, her face draining of color. They were being stalked by someone they would have trusted for help. Emily carefully placed the image under a magnifying lamp. The figure's face was indistinct, but the uniform was unmistakable, an older style of ranger attire from the 80s, complete with the period-correct patch on the shoulder. "This changes everything," Emily said, her mind racing through possibilities. If this person used their position to gain the campers' trust. Thomas Hayes joined them later that afternoon, his weathered face hardening when shown the photograph. "Rebecca would have approached a ranger without hesitation if she needed help," he said, voice breaking slightly. "She was raised to respect authority." Douglas Whitman examined the photo next, his retired ranger's eyes narrowing. "That's definitely our uniform from back then. But something's not right about how it fits. Like someone who wasn't actually a ranger." Emily carefully bagged the photograph as new evidence. The implications were disturbing. Someone had potentially impersonated a figure of authority to get close to the 9 campers. Someone who knew the forest well enough to stalk them undetected. "We need to pull records of everyone who worked at Pisgah in '81, Emily told her team, "and check if any uniforms went missing around that time." As she drove back to her office, Emily couldn't shake the image from her mind. The blurred figure among the trees represented something worse than a random killer. It suggested calculated betrayal, a predator wearing the disguise of a protector. Douglas Whitman's weathered hands trembled slightly as he placed his old ranger logbook on the table between them. Emily Carter watched the retired ranger's face contort with decades of unspoken guilt. "I saw someone that night," Douglas confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "A man hauling tarps up the eastern ridge. I wrote it off as just another squatter. We had plenty back then." He tapped a yellowed page dated August 3rd, 1981, just 2 days after the campers vanished. Emily leaned forward, pulse quickening. "Why didn't we report this during the original investigation?" "I did mention it, but nobody followed up. It was chaos back then. Search parties everywhere, families screaming for answers." The old ranger's eyes clouded with regret. "By the time I went back to check, there was nothing there." The following morning, Emily and Douglas retraced the old patrol routes, their boots crunching over pine needles as mist clung to the forest floor. The retired ranger moved with surprising agility despite his age, pointing out landmarks that had barely changed in 42 years. "Locals used to talk about Harlan Briggs," Douglas explained, as they navigated a steep incline. "Never had official confirmation he existed, but stories were consistent. Tall man, kept to himself, appeared and disappeared like a ghost." Emily recorded everything on her smartphone. "Any idea where he might have camped?" "That's the thing. Nobody ever found his permanent shelter. Rangers searched these woods for years." Douglas paused to catch his breath. But there were signs. Livestock gone missing from nearby farms. Perfectly constructed snares that no ordinary hunter would use. Some hikers reported food vanishing from their packs while they slept. They stopped at a natural overlook. Below them, Pisgah National Forest stretched endlessly, a sea of green hiding countless secrets. "The strangest thing," Douglas continued, "was how animals behaved around certain parts of the forest, like they were avoiding specific areas. Even experienced hunting dogs would refuse to enter some ravines." At a local diner that afternoon, Emily interviewed 3 longtime residents who remembered the rumors. An elderly woman described finding elaborate arrangements of stones near her property line every solstice. A former mail carrier recalled delivering packages to the forest's edge for someone who never showed their face. "People said he knew these mountains better than anyone," the mail carrier explained. "Some claimed he'd been a ranger himself once, before something changed him." Emily connected these fragments with the evidence they'd already gathered. The precision of the buried tents, the ritualistic elements, the knowledge of patrol schedules. "If Harlan Briggs is real," she told Douglas as they pored over maps that evening, "and if he's still alive, he might be our only link to what really happened to those 9 campers." The retired ranger nodded grimly. "And if he's survived out there all these years, he doesn't want to be found." The morning dew still clung to the forest undergrowth as Emily Carter and Clara Miller made their way through the dense foliage. Douglas Whitman had shared coordinates from an old ranger's logbook, a possible lead he'd never followed up on back in '81. "I should have checked this place years ago," Douglas had confessed, his weathered hands trembling as he marked the spot on Emily's map. "Always thought it was just another squatter's hideout." The cabin appeared suddenly between the trees, a dilapidated structure nearly consumed by nature. Moss carpeted the sagging roof, and thick vines embraced the walls like possessive fingers. Clara paused, her breath catching. "Someone lived here," she whispered, "watching them." Emily approached cautiously, her ranger training keeping her alert for structural dangers. The wooden door hung askew on rusted hinges, creaking ominously as she pushed it open. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the roof, illuminating dancing dust particles. "Look for anything unusual," Emily instructed, scanning the single room with her flashlight. "Loose boards, irregular spacing." Clara moved methodically across the warped floorboards, her footsteps echoing in the abandoned space. "Jonathan would have documented everything about this place," she murmured, running her fingers along a windowsill. "He never missed details." The ranger's boot caught on an uneven plank near the stone hearth. She knelt, examining the floor more closely, "This section's different," Emily noted, tapping the boards. The hollow sound confirmed her suspicion. Working together, they pried up the planks, revealing a space beneath. Emily's flashlight beam illuminated the cache, a collection of items carefully arranged in the darkness. "Oh my God," Clara gasped, recognizing a blue bandana that had belonged to her brother. Her hand shook as she lifted it from the hole. The collection was methodical, almost shrine-like. A Swiss Army knife, a bracelet of woven threads, a student ID card, all belonging to different campers. At the center sat an intricately carved wooden box, its surface etched with the same spiral patterns Rebecca Hayes had drawn in her notebook. Emily carefully opened the box, revealing meticulously folded maps of the trail with handwritten notations marking the camper's progress. Beneath these lay detailed sketches of 9 young faces, each rendered with unsettling precision. "He was tracking them," Emily said quietly, "studying them." Clara lifted a sketch of Jonathan, the likeness so accurate it made her breath catch. "This wasn't random," she whispered. "Whoever did this, they were obsessed." The ranger bagged each item carefully, documenting everything for evidence. The cabin had finally yielded its secret, not just a hiding place, but a trophy room for someone who had watched the campers with calculated intensity before they vanished. As they prepared to leave, Emily noticed something scratched into the hearthstone, a crude rendering of 9/10 arranged in a familiar pattern. Rebecca Hayes' notebook lay open on Emily Carter's desk, its weathered pages revealing intricate sketches that had survived 4 decades sealed beneath the earth. The ranger traced her finger over the symbols, concentric spirals, 5-pointed stars, and intersecting lines that formed complex geometric patterns. She was documenting these, Emily said, showing the notebook to Clara Miller. "Look at the dates. These drawings were made just 3 days before they vanished." Clara nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and dread. Jonathan mentioned something about Rebecca being fascinated by markings they found. He thought they were just trailblazes. But Emily knew better. The forensic team had photographed unusual soil discolorations surrounding the burial site, patches where the mineral composition differed subtly from the surrounding earth. When overlaid with Rebecca's sketches, the patterns matched perfectly. They saw these before they disappeared. Emily explained to Thomas Hayes when he arrived that afternoon. "Your daughter wasn't just drawing random symbols, she was mapping something." Thomas stared at his daughter's handwriting, his stoic demeanor cracking slightly. Rebecca always noticed details others missed, even as a child. Emily arranged a meeting with Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, a folklorist specializing in Appalachian traditions. The academic arrived carrying leather-bound volumes filled with similar symbols documented throughout the mountain communities. "These aren't random, Doctor," Blackwood explained, adjusting her glasses. "What Rebecca documented are variations of protection and warning markers used by early settlers. Some indicate safe passage areas, places blessed or protected. Others mark threshold zones where the veil between worlds was considered thin." "You're saying these are superstitions?" Emily asked skeptically. "I'm saying these symbols have been carved into trees and arranged in stone formations throughout these mountains for centuries," the folklorist replied. "Local families taught their children which patterns meant safety and which meant danger." Emily spread out the site photographs. "And these particular arrangements?" Dr. Blackwood's expression darkened. "These are boundary markers, warnings to stay away. In traditional folklore, they designate places where something was contained or sealed." Douglas Whitman, examining the evidence from across the room, spoke up. "The old-timers used to say certain hollows and ridges were cursed, places where the forest itself turned hostile." Emily felt a chill despite her rational mind. The symbols formed a perimeter around where the tents were found, as if creating a barrier or a prison. "The question isn't just who buried those tents," Dr. Blackwood said quietly. "It's why they needed to be contained with such ancient methods." Emily glanced at Clara and Thomas. both transfixed by this unexpected connection between scientific evidence and mountain lore. The investigation had just taken a turn into territory no ranger training had prepared her for. Emily Carter spread the site photographs across her desk, arranging them in concentric circles. Something about the pattern had been nagging at her for days. The 9 tents weren't randomly placed. They formed a deliberate configuration that seemed vaguely familiar. "It's not just a burial," she whispered to herself. "It's a message." Clara Miller entered the ranger station, carrying coffee for them both. She noticed Emily's intense focus on the arrangement. "What are you seeing?" Clara asked, setting down the cups. The tents weren't just hidden. They were positioned deliberately. Emily pointed to the pattern. "Look at how they radiate outward from this central point." Dr. Miles Monroe arrived shortly after, his astronomy expertise proving invaluable. The professor studied the photographs, making quick calculations on his notepad. "This isn't random," he confirmed. "The arrangement mirrors the astronomical alignment visible during the summer solstice of 1981. See how these 3 tents form Orion's belt, and these others create the summer triangle?" Emily felt a chill despite the warm office. So whoever buried them wasn't just hiding evidence, they were recreating the night sky. "The precision is remarkable," Dr. Monroe continued. "They would have needed astronomical knowledge or reference materials. This wasn't improvised." Thomas Hayes joined them, his weathered face showing both confusion and dread. "Rebecca was always fascinated by stars," he said quietly. "She chose that camping trip because she wanted to see the solstice from the mountains." Emily connected the dots. The symbols in Rebecca's notebook, they weren't just doodles, they were star charts. Douglas Whitman, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. "There were always rumors about solstice rituals in those mountains. Old Appalachian beliefs about thin places where worlds connect." "You think this was some kind of cult activity?" Clara asked, her voice breaking. "Or someone using those beliefs to create an elaborate psychological framework," Emily suggested. "Either way, this wasn't a panic cover-up. It was deliberate, planned, almost reverential. The implications spread through the room like smoke. If the burial was ritualistic, it transformed their understanding of the case entirely. This wasn't just about hiding bodies. It was about preserving them in a specific pattern for a specific purpose. "We need to check if anything significant happened during subsequent solstices," Emily said. "If Harlan Briggs is our suspect, he might return to the site during astronomically significant dates." The revelation sparked a new direction for the investigation. Was this the work of a deranged mind using folklore as justification? Or something darker, rooted in the mountain's ancient traditions? As the team dispersed with new research tasks, Emily remained, staring at the pattern. The forest had kept its secrets for 42 years. Now, the stars themselves were speaking. The infrared glow of surveillance cameras blinked silently among the ancient oaks. Emily Carter had positioned them strategically around the burial site 3 days earlier, hoping to capture evidence of wildlife disturbance or curious hikers. What she recorded instead sent chills down her spine. At precisely 3:27 in the morning, a solitary figure emerged from the mist-shrouded tree line. Dressed in dark clothing that blended with the forest shadows, the person moved with deliberate purpose toward the excavated area. There was no hesitation in their steps, no searching or uncertainty. They knew exactly where they were going. "Look at how they move," Emily whispered as she and Douglas Whitman reviewed the footage in her small office. "Like they've walked this path 1,000 times." The retired ranger leaned closer to the screen, his weathered face tight with concentration. "They're not just visiting," he observed. "Watch their hands." The figure knelt at the edge of the site, producing small objects from a bag, stones, twigs, and what appeared to be dried herbs. With practiced movements, they arranged these items in a pattern around the perimeter, occasionally pausing to mutter something the cameras couldn't capture. "It's ritualistic," Emily said, her voice barely audible. "They're tending to it like a shrine." Douglas nodded grimly. "Whoever this is, they've been doing this for years. Decades, maybe." The footage continued for 17 minutes. The figure circled the site counterclockwise 3 times before stopping to place something at what Emily recognized as the northern point, the same direction the tents had been aligned toward. "Can we enhance the face?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Not with this equipment," Douglas replied. "They're keeping their head down deliberately. They know we might be watching." Emily felt her heart racing. This wasn't some curious local or thrill-seeking teenager. This was someone intimately connected to what happened in 1981, someone still actively maintaining whatever secret lay buried with those tents. "The Watcher is still alive," she breathed, the realization settling over her like a cold shroud. "And still protecting something," Douglas added, his voice heavy with 42 years of unanswered questions. As the figure finally retreated into the darkness, Emily paused the footage. The last frame caught a momentary glimpse of the person looking back, their face still obscured, but their posture suggesting not fear of discovery, but warning. "We need to set up more cameras," Emily said, already reaching for her phone. "And we need to be there next time." Douglas nodded solemnly. Whatever secret they've been keeping all these years, they're not going to give it up easily. The parking lot outside the Pisgah National Forest Visitor Center had transformed into a makeshift broadcast hub overnight. Satellite vans from CNN, Fox News, and a dozen other networks crowded the asphalt, their logos gleaming under the morning sun. Emily Carter ducked her head as she hurried inside, avoiding the forest of microphones that sprouted whenever she appeared. "Ranger Carter, is it true you found evidence of occult activity?" A reporter shouted. Inside wasn't much better. Her supervisor, Regional Director Patel, waited with a tight expression. "This has gone too far, Emily. The phones haven't stopped ringing. Half the country thinks we're sitting on some Blair Witch sequel." Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I'm following the evidence, sir. The astronomical alignments are factual, not superstition." "Stick to forensics," he countered, sliding a stack of newspapers across the desk. Headlines screamed about Appalachian cult sacrifices and mountain magic mystery. Downtown Asheville was feeling the pressure too. At Riverside Cafe, Clara Miller sat across from Emily, pushing her untouched coffee aside. "The hotel clerk asked if I was here for the witch hunt tourism," Clara said, disgust evident in her voice, like Jonathan and the others were just some attraction. Outside the window, a tour guide led a group past, pointing toward the mountains, where the infamous Pisgah 9 disappeared in a suspected ritual sacrifice. Thomas Hayes joined them, his weathered face more lined than usual. "Rebecca would hate this circus," he muttered. "My daughter loved those mountains. She wasn't part of some devil worship nonsense." The bell above the door jingled as 3 elderly men entered, their gazes finding Emily immediately. One approached their table, his Appalachian accent thick with anger. "You should have left those tents buried, Ranger. Some things ain't meant to be disturbed." "With respect, sir," Emily replied evenly. 9 families have waited 42 years for answers. And now, you've invited the Watcher's anger down on all of us," he warned before shuffling away. That evening, Emily faced her superiors on a video call. The Forest Service Regional Director was blunt. "Focus on solid evidence, fingerprints, DNA, timeline reconstruction. Leave the solstice alignments and mountain folklore out of your reports." Emily muted her microphone and turned to Douglas Whitman, who sat in the corner of her office. "If I ignore the patterns, we'll never understand why those tents were arranged that way," she insisted. The retired ranger nodded. "Sometimes the rational path misses the forest for the trees, Emily." Later, alone in her apartment, Emily pinned Rebecca's symbols beside the astronomical charts from Dr. Monroe. The connection was undeniable. Her phone buzzed with another media request, which she ignored. The truth wouldn't be found in headlines or official reports that sanitized the uncomfortable parts. It lived somewhere between science and story, in the shadows where Harlan Briggs still moved, tending his terrible secret. Emily Carter spread the aerial photographs across Dr. Miles Monroe's cluttered desk at UNC Asheville. The astronomer adjusted his glasses, studying the precise arrangement of the 9/10 with growing fascination. "This isn't random," Dr. Monroe said, tracing the pattern with his finger. "These tents form a near-perfect representation of the Pleiades constellation, the Seven Sisters, plus 2 additional markers that align with Jupiter and Saturn's positions during the summer solstice of 1981. Emily felt a chill, despite the warmth of the university office. "You're saying someone deliberately arranged them this way?" Without question. The astronomer pulled up astronomical charts on his computer. "Look here, the alignment would only be visible from this exact location on the summer solstice." The precision is unsettling. Emily thought about Harlan Briggs, wondering what kind of person possessed both the astronomical knowledge and the disturbing dedication to create such an elaborate arrangement. Could this be coincidence? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Dr. Monroe shook his head. The statistical probability approaches 0. Whoever did this either had advanced astronomical knowledge or was following specific instructions, perhaps from an ancient ritual. He pulled out a book on Appalachian folklore, flipping to a dog-eared page. Native traditions in these mountains speak of star-aligned gathering places. Some Cherokee stories mention special sites where the boundary between worlds thins during solstices. The ranger stared at the photographs, remembering the symbols in Rebecca Hayes's notebook. The spirals and intersecting lines suddenly made horrifying sense. They weren't random doodles, but astronomical markers. "So our perpetrator wasn't just hiding bodies," Emily said quietly. "They were creating some kind of ritual site." "Or recreating one," Dr. Monroe suggested. "These mountains have witnessed countless rituals over thousands of years. Someone could be reenacting something very old." Emily thanked the astronomer and gathered her materials. Outside, she called Clara Miller with the news. "The tents were arranged to match the stars," she explained. "This wasn't just a murder, it was something ceremonial." Clara's voice trembled over the phone. "Jonathan wrote about strange lights in the sky the night before they disappeared. We thought he meant flashlights from other hikers." Emily's mind raced as she drove back toward Pisgah Forest. The scientific confirmation transformed what might have been dismissed as superstition into something tangibly real. The forest concealed more than a simple crime. It held a ritual site, created by someone who believed in powers beyond rational explanation. She pulled over at a scenic overlook, gazing at the vast expanse of ancient mountains. For the first time since beginning this investigation, Emily wondered if she was hunting a killer or something far more disturbing, a true believer who had sacrificed 9 lives to satisfy some terrible cosmic bargain. Clara Miller's hands trembled as she turned the pages of her brother's journal. Sitting in the corner of Emily Carter's office, she'd been quiet for over an hour, lost in Jonathan's final words. When the sob finally came, it startled everyone in the room. "He knew," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "The night before they disappeared, Jonathan wrote that something felt wrong. He wanted to leave, but stayed because the others were excited about reaching the summit." She pressed the journal to her chest, decades of grief washing over her face. Emily moved to comfort her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The ranger had grown close to the families over the past weeks, their pain becoming part of her own burden. Across the room, Thomas Hayes stared out the window, his stoic demeanor finally cracking. "I pushed her," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Rebecca wanted to study art at community college, but I told her she needed real experiences to draw from." Thomas turned to face them, eyes rimmed with red. "I practically forced her onto that trail, told her adventure would make her stronger." Emily watched as Clara crossed the room and, without hesitation, embrace Thomas. Two strangers, connected by parallel losses, finding understanding in shared regret. "We all have our ghosts," Clara said softly. "Jonathan followed his friends because he never wanted to disappoint anyone. I spent 42 years wishing I told him it was okay to come home." The office fell silent, except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning. Outside, reporters still lingered in the parking lot, hungry for updates. But inside this room, something more important was happening. A fragile alliance forming between those left behind. "My daughter drew those symbols for weeks before the trip," Thomas revealed, pulling a faded sketch from his wallet. "I thought it was just her artistic nature. Now I wonder if she sensed something." Emily carefully took the drawing, noting its similarity to the patterns in Rebecca's recovered notebook. Each new piece connected them deeper to the truth, even as it reopened wounds. "We can't change what happened," Emily said, "but we can honor them by finding answers." Clara nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. Jonathan would have wanted that. He always believed mysteries could be solved if you looked hard enough. As evening approached, they gathered their belongings with new resolve. The grief remained, raw and permanent, but something else had emerged alongside it: purpose. In their shared quest for truth, these strangers had found a reason to continue, a way to transform decades of pain into determination. "Tomorrow," Emily promised, "we follow the symbols." Emily Carter found the first note tucked under her windshield wiper after a long day at the burial site. Written in a spidery hand on yellowed paper, the message was clear: "The mountains keep their balance. Stop digging or they'll take you too." The Appalachian dialect was unmistakable, the threat barely veiled. Over the next week, 3 more appeared, each more unsettling than the last. One spoke of watchers older than the trees. Another warned that 9 went in. None came out, and you'll be the 10th. Emily brought them to Douglas Whitman, whose weathered face creased with concern. "Someone's trying to get in your head," the retired ranger said, examining the papers. These phrases, they're old mountain talk, but arranged too perfectly, like someone studied our folklore rather than grew up with it. The psychological warfare extended beyond notes. Emily arrived at the excavation site one morning to find the perimeter tape slashed and the tents rearranged in a perfect star pattern. Forensics confirmed no evidence was compromised, but the message was clear. The perpetrator had unfettered access. "They're watching us," Clara Miller whispered, clutching her brother Jonathan's journal tighter. "Just like they watched them." Thomas Hayes offered to stay at the site overnight, but Emily refused. "This is my investigation," she insisted, though her confidence wavered in private. Alone in her cabin that night, Emily bolted upright at 3 a.m., gasping for air. The panic attacks had started after the second note. Her heart hammered against her ribs as sweat drenched her sheets. The rational part of her brain knew this was anxiety. The irrational part heard footsteps on her porch that weren't there. The next day, surveillance footage revealed a hooded figure placing small, carved wooden totems around the burial site, each matching symbols from Rebecca's notebook. The figure moved with purpose, never showing their face to the cameras. "They're escalating," Emily told her supervisor, fighting to keep her voice steady. "They want us scared, confused. They want us to quit." That evening, Emily found her research files scattered across her office floor. Nothing was missing, but photographs of the 9 campers had been arranged in a circle. In the center lay a fresh note: "The forest remembers what you've forgotten." Despite her trembling hands and sleepless nights, Emily's resolve hardened. She pinned each note to her investigation board, connecting them to the symbols, the tents, the astronomical alignments. The psychological game was meant to break her. Instead, it was giving her a direct line into the perpetrator's mind. "You want me afraid?" she whispered to the empty room. "Then you shouldn't have shown me how much you're afraid of what I'll find." The forensics lab called Emily Carter at 5 in the morning. She grabbed her phone, still half asleep, and listened as the technician's excited voice explained what they'd found. The enhanced image from Patrick's camera revealed what everyone had missed: a distinct ranger patch on the uniform of the shadowy figure watching the campers. "It's definitely one of ours," Emily told Clara Miller later that morning, spreading the enhanced photographs across her desk. "That's a 1980s-era ranger patch. Whoever was stalking your brother and his friends was either a ranger or someone who got hold of a uniform." Clara leaned forward, studying the grainy image. Her fingers trembled slightly as they hovered over her brother Jonathan's last photographic legacy. So it wasn't some random killer or mountain man. It was someone they might have trusted. The revelation shifted the entire investigation. Emily compiled a list of everyone who had worked at Pisgah National Forest during that period: rangers, seasonal employees, volunteers, maintenance workers. The list numbered 43 people, 12 now deceased, the rest scattered across the country. Douglas Whitman was among the first interviewed. The retired ranger sat across from Emily in the station, his weathered face drawn with concern. "I should have seen something," he said, shaking his head. "All these years, I thought it might have been hikers who went off trail, or maybe a storm. Never imagined it could be one of our own." Fingerprint analysis cleared Douglas within days. The prints found on the preserved tent fabric didn't match his. But the database search turned up an unexpected hit: Harlan Briggs, arrested once in 1976 for trespassing on federal land. "He worked maintenance for us," Douglas explained when Emily called him with the news. "Only for one season. Quiet man, knew the forest better than most rangers. Always thought he was harmless, eccentric, but harmless." Emily and Thomas Hayes pored over employment records late into the night. The father of Rebecca Hayes had insisted on helping, needing to be part of finding his daughter's truth. "Briggs was terminated in early 1980, Thomas read aloud, squinting at the yellow document. "Reasons cited: erratic behavior and unauthorized use of park resources." Which means he still had access to uniforms, equipment, maybe even keys, Emily added, connecting the dots. "And a grudge against the Park Service." The investigation team assembled a profile: Harlan Briggs, now in his 70s, with no fixed address for over 40 years. A man who'd melted into the Appalachian wilderness, but somehow maintained a vigil over 9 buried tents for decades. As night fell over Asheville, Emily stared at the map of Pisgah where they'd marked potential hiding places. The forest had protected Briggs for 42 years, but his fingerprints had finally betrayed him. Emily Carter's patience was about to pay off. After weeks of meticulous planning, she positioned surveillance cameras in the dense foliage surrounding the burial site. The stakeout operation had been carefully orchestrated with local law enforcement, who'd initially been skeptical but now recognized the gravity of the case. "The fog will give us good cover," Douglas Whitman whispered as they crouched behind a thicket of mountain laurel. The retired ranger had spent 40 years traversing these woods, and his knowledge proved invaluable. His weathered hands pointed out optimal hiding spots where officers could remain undetected. "He'll come from the eastern ridge," Douglas predicted. "That old trail isn't on any maps, but locals have used it for generations." The October night descended with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl. Emily checked her smartphone one last time, confirming all cameras were operational. The team had been waiting for 3 nights already, but something in her gut told her tonight would be different. Just after midnight, movement triggered the first alarm. A shadowy figure emerged from the mist, moving with surprising agility despite carrying a canvas bag. The officers tensed, hands hovering near their weapons, but Emily signaled them to hold position. The figure approached the burial site with reverence, kneeling before placing items from the bag in a specific pattern around the perimeter. The team watched through night vision equipment as the stranger muttered to himself, words too faint to decipher, but clearly ritualistic in cadence. "That's him," Emily breathed, recognizing the distinctive movements that matched previous surveillance footage. When the figure turned toward one of the hidden cameras, the infrared light illuminated a gaunt face with wild, haunted eyes. The man showed no awareness of being observed as he continued his strange ritual, arranging small stones and branches in the same symbolic patterns found in Rebecca's notebook. "Harlan Briggs," Douglas confirmed, his voice a mix of vindication and sorrow. The man they'd been hunting for weeks was no longer just a name or a theory. Harlan moved with the confidence of someone who had performed this ritual countless times over decades. Tending to the burial site as if it were sacred ground, Emily signaled the team to close in. As officers emerged from their hiding spots, Harlan seemed almost unsurprised, as if he'd been expecting this confrontation for 42 years. His wild eyes locked with Emily's, and for a moment, she saw not just madness, but something deeper, a terrible knowledge that made her blood run cold. "The mountain sent you," Harlan said simply as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "It knows its time." Emily Carter stood her ground as Harlan Briggs emerged from the mist, his gaunt figure illuminated by the beam of her flashlight. 42 years of wilderness living had weathered him into something barely recognizable as human, his beard wild and gray, eyes sunken yet eerily alert. "We've been looking for you for a long time, Harlan," Emily said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. The old man tilted his head, studying her ranger uniform with a flicker of recognition. "You wear the badge, but you don't understand the forest," he rasped. "None of you ever did." Emily took a careful step forward. "I understand that 9 young people disappeared, and you've been tending to their burial site for decades. I need to know why." Harlan's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. "Burial? No. Containment. I sealed what needed sealing." His fingers traced symbols in the air, the same patterns from Rebecca's notebook. "The mountain made me promise. The mountain shows you things if you listen long enough." "What happened to them, Harlan?" Emily pressed, recording every word on her smartphone hidden in her pocket. "They came with their music and their laughter," he muttered, eyes darting to the shadows between trees. "Pitched their tents where the old paths cross. Didn't listen when the warnings came." "Did you kill them?" Emily asked bluntly. Harlan recoiled as if struck. "Kill? No. I tried to save them." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But they'd already seen too much. The Watcher had marked them." Emily felt Douglas Whitman shift in position behind a nearby oak, their backup plan if Harlan became violent. "If you didn't kill them, where are they?" "Gone," Harlan said simply. "Taken. But their vessels, those tents, they were contaminated. Had to be sealed properly, every solstice, every alignment, maintaining the barrier." He stepped closer, his eyes suddenly clear and terrifyingly sane. "You think I'm mad, but I've protected Asheville for 42 years. The symbols keep it contained. The arrangement maintains balance." "Contained what exactly?" Emily asked. Harlan's face contorted. "Something old, something hungry. It wears faces it shouldn't wear, speaks with voices it shouldn't have." His fingers dug into Emily's arm with surprising strength. "They walked into its territory willingly. I couldn't stop what happened, but I could stop it from spreading." As Emily signaled for the arrest team to move in, she realized the most disturbing possibility of all, that Harlan truly believed every word. His obsession wasn't born of guilt, but of conviction. Whether delusion or terrible truth, the certainty in his eyes suggested that closing this case might not bring the clean resolution everyone desperately wanted. Harlan Briggs's arrest dominated the national news cycle for weeks. Camera crews lined the streets of Asheville as the gaunt, wild-eyed man was led into the courthouse, his mumbled words about mountain promises fueling endless speculation. Emily Carter watched from the back of the room during his arraignment, studying the man who had preserved a tragedy like a twisted time capsule. "He's confessed to moving and burying the tents," Emily explained to Clara Miller and Thomas Hayes over coffee at a local diner. But his story about what happened to the campers themselves is complicated. The families gathered in a private room at the law enforcement office the following day. Emily laid out what they knew. Harlan had been a junior Forest Service volunteer in 1981, obsessed with Appalachian folklore. He'd stalked the 9 campers, convinced they had disturbed sacred ground by camping at a site aligned with the summer solstice. He claims he found the tents empty. Emily said softly, "No blood, no signs of struggle, just abandoned equipment." Clara clutched her brother Jonathan's journal. "But he buried everything. He hid the evidence." "Out of fear," Emily confirmed. "He believed something in the forest had taken them, and that burying the tents would contain whatever curse or spirit was responsible." The truth brought closure, but little comfort. Forensic teams uncovered human remains scattered across 3 remote locations, confirming the campers had indeed perished in the forest. Whether by Harlan's hand or through some terrible accident remained unclear. His fragmented memories and delusional beliefs made a coherent confession impossible. Thomas stared at the photograph of his daughter Rebecca. 42 years of not knowing was worse than this, he whispered, though his eyes suggested otherwise. For the families, answers came with fresh wounds. For the community, the revelation that one of their own had perpetuated decades of mystery brought shame and introspection. Several elders admitted they'd suspected Harlan, but kept quiet out of misguided protection for one of their own. Emily found herself changed by the investigation. She still patrolled the same trails, but now noticed things she'd previously overlooked. Ancient carvings on trees, peculiar arrangements of stones, the way certain clearings seemed to capture starlight differently. At night, she dreamed of 9 young faces she knew only from photographs, wandering through misty woods, forever searching for a way home. "The case is closed," her supervisor declared at the final briefing. Emily nodded, but as she drove home along the winding mountain roads, she wondered if any secret kept by these ancient forests could ever truly be put to rest, or if they simply waited, patient as the mountains themselves, for the next curious soul to uncover them. The first snow of winter dusted the Appalachian trails like powdered sugar, transforming Pisgah National Forest into a silent cathedral of white. Emily Carter trudged through the fresh powder, her breath forming clouds that disappeared into the crystalline air. The burial site, once a hub of frantic activity, now lay peaceful under nature's blanket. She knelt beside the small stone marker she'd commissioned, 9 names etched in granite, their stories now part of the mountain's lore. Emily ran her gloved fingers over Jonathan Miller's name, remembering Clara's face when they'd finally laid her brother to rest. The families had gathered here last week for a private ceremony, Thomas Hayes standing stoically beside Clara, both of them weathered by decades of uncertainty finally resolved. "I wish we had more answers for you," Emily whispered to the stone. The case was closed officially. Harlan Briggs awaited trial, his confession a tangled web of superstition and guilt. But the ranger knew some truths would remain buried forever. Why had he preserved, rather than destroyed, the evidence? What promise to the mountain had driven him to such obsession? Douglas had accompanied her on most visits, but today she needed solitude. The retired ranger had found his own peace in mentoring Emily through the investigation's darkest moments. In his weathered hands, she'd seen her future, either burdened by unanswered questions or accepting that some mysteries belonged to the forest alone. She placed 9 small river stones in a circle around the marker, an echo of the tent arrangement that had started it all. Dr. Monroe had explained how the positioning aligned with celestial patterns, but science couldn't account for the chill that still ran down her spine when she thought about Harlan's whispered warnings. Emily stood, brushing snow from her uniform pants. The media frenzy had finally subsided, leaving Asheville to heal. Some locals still avoided her gaze in town, believing she disturbed something better left dormant. Others thanked her quietly for bringing closure to a wound that had festered in their community for 42 years. The forest seemed different now, not threatening, but aware. Emily had spent her career believing in what she could touch and measure, but this case had taught her humility. Between the rational world of evidence and the shadowy realm of Appalachian folklore lay a territory she now respected without fully understanding. As she turned to leave, Emily felt the weight of watching eyes lift from her shoulders for the first time in months. Harlan's presence, that sensation of being observed that had haunted both her and those 9 campers, was finally gone. But the forest remained, ancient and patient, its memory longer than any humans. The snow continued to fall, covering her footprints almost as quickly as she made them.